Ambassador Daniel Fried, a retired American diplomat and former United States Assistant Secretary of State, thanks for letting Georgia Today interview you.
Thank you.
At the 8th Tbilisi International Conference, you participated in a panel discussion about holding Putin and Russia accountable. Considering that the relationship between the West and Russia is at its lowest, how likely is it to accomplish this mission?
Much depends on the war in Ukraine and how it ends, and I don't know how it will end. The battlefield is mixed. The Russians are advancing in the Donbass. The Ukrainians are holding quite a bit of territory in Kursk Oblast. They are attacking each other with missiles and drones, and the outcome of the war is not known. Much depends on who wins. Russia will be held accountable in this sense. Relations between Russia and the West are not going to go back to where they were before 2014 for a very long time, and possibly, in fact, probably, as long as Putin is in control. The discussion on yesterday's panel had to do with ways to hold Russia accountable. I spoke to sanctions. Other people spoke to issues of Russian recognition of its crimes and imperial past. Well, I believe in being as practical as possible, and sanctions and other forms of economic pressure are tools we have right now, and we should use them well.
While joining the EU is officially on the agenda of the ruling Georgian Dream Party, we see them testing the waters by offering BRICS as an alternative to our society. How likely is it that Ms. Ivanishvili will manage to turn its back on the West, and is the West itself ready to tackle such a monumental issue?
I think Mr. Ivanishvili and the Georgian government have already turned their back on the EU and NATO. There is no other way to interpret recent moves by the government, such as the implementation of the Russia law, the foreign agents law, and especially the threats to outlaw the political opposition. This is an explicit authoritarian move. Then the Georgian government suggesting that this is its intention is a way of shutting the door, closing the road to NATO, and closing the door to the European Union. Last year at the McCain conference, the topic among almost everyone here was whether the EU should offer Georgia a prospective membership. And after a lot of discussion, it was generally the view of most of the people here that it should. And in fact, it did. But the Georgian government seemed to misinterpret the gesture. It was a gesture of friendship toward the Georgian people and toward Georgian society. But the government took it, apparently, as a license to continue its anti-democratic direction. Well, the United States is trying to decide with some reluctance what to do in the face of the Georgian government's authoritarian turn, and the EU is basically frozen the accession process. So the Georgian government is well on the way to forcing Georgian society into a future with Russia that invaded Georgia and is occupying Georgia, and not with Europe, which has helped Georgia and promises to help it even more.
As you've said, Ms. Ivanishvili has already turned its back on the West. So I wonder why the EU allows the Georgian Dream Party to deceive people by claiming that it is the only party that can truly lead the country towards the EU. Don't you think the EU needs to be more vocal about GD and make more decisive actions?
A couple of years ago, it was possible to imagine that Georgian Dream could lead Georgia into the EU. Now, given the current actions and statements of the Georgian government, that is impossible. There is no way on God's green earth that Georgia will join the EU if the government continues its current course. I want to be as clear as I can. There is no way on earth that that will happen. The EU will have nothing to do with a government which is acting against basic democratic principles, which is threatening to outlaw the political opposition, which is going after civil society, which is attacking its own people. There is no way that this will happen. Georgian Dream won power in free and fair elections, but it is sacrificing that mandate on the altar of what? An authoritarian vision for Georgia? With a vision of Georgia with the BRICS? Are they kidding? There is no way that Georgia's European aspirations will be met with this government leading the country unless this government radically changes its current course.
Do you believe that that will happen?
It's not for me to say. The United States does not choose Georgia's government. That is up to the Georgian people. But we respond to what the Georgian government is doing. And what the Georgian government is doing is utterly inconsistent with both its stated objectives and with the principles that underlie the European Union and NATO.
Many in Georgia believe that the importance of the 2024 general elections is comparable to the one held in 2012, as the winds of change are once again blowing through the country. What is your take on this matter?
I don't know who will win the elections. I know that Georgians have different opinions. Many Georgians believe that the opposition, if it manages either to unite or work together, will succeed. President Zhurabishvili has introduced the Georgian Charter, which I think most political parties in the opposition have signed on to. I'm an outsider, but when I read it, it certainly seems to be a constructive idea. That is a technocratic government which will try to advance Georgia's European Union aspirations and lead to new elections in a year. It's not for me to say, but at least this appears to be a more constructive road than the road of confrontation and authoritarianism with a hint of violence, which is what the government is purveying.
Almost all the high officials who have worked with Mr. Ivanishvili in the past, including former Prime Minister Georgi Gakharia and current President Zurabishvili, say that the honorary chair of the ruling Georgian Dream Party is an oligarch. My question is this: why hasn't the West sanctioned him for ruling the country unconstitutionally if what his former partners say is true?
The United States, and I think the European Union, would much prefer that Georgian Dream and Mr. Ivanishvili change their course rather than engage in a process of pressure and sanctions. We would much prefer that. Now, many Georgians would say that's naive, that won't happen, you must take stronger steps. They may turn out to be right. But I understand why Washington and Brussels wanted a more cautious approach. They were hoping, praying, doing everything they could to get the message through to Mr. Ivanishvili that you don't have to choose a course of confrontation, that we are not anti-Georgian Dream. We are pro-democracy, pro-Georgia, pro-reform, pro-rule of law, and to the degree that any party advances those objectives, we're happy to work with them. Now, it may be that the actions of the Georgian government are so abhorrent that we have no choice other than to take tougher steps. The United States has already suspended assistance to the Georgian government. Not terminated it, suspended it. Suspensions can be reversed. But there are, obviously, many steps we could take. I believe the United States government is going to be looking hard at two issues in Georgia. One is the implementation of the so-called Russia law, the foreign agents law. The second is the conduct of the elections. And it will choose, in consultation with the European Union, choose its actions according to what the Georgian government does.
Don't you think that if Ivanishvili stays in power and start implementing his election promises regarding the opposition and civil society, it might be too late for the West to react.
Well, I don't know what too late means. The United States and the European Union are, I believe, looking now at all their options and preparing for different scenarios, hoping for better scenarios, but preparing for action in any case. The United States does not choose the government of Georgia. The Georgian people do. We are not going to be the decisive players in Georgia. Georgians will be the decisive players. We are going to take our steps and take a position based on our principles and our support for the Georgian people and Georgian society. How, the timing, the details of that are things that Washington and Brussels are working on. They are hoping for the best, but preparing for, I'm afraid, the worst.
The reason why I'm asking you this question is that last time the opposition considered the elections rigged, GD agreed to negotiate because they were interested in maintaining good relations with the West. However, this time, as you've mentioned, they've completely turned their backs on the West. Don't you think that if the opposition deems the election rigged again, the West might be unable to stop GD from seizing the power?
I don't know. Georgian history suggests that the Georgian people are neither stupid nor passive. They're not sheep. They don't believe everything they're told. They don't like authoritarian or arbitrary rule. That's why they eventually tired of Saakashvili and voted his party out of power. They did so. And they voted for Georgian Dream, which was then promising to succeed where the Saakashvili government had failed. They would succeed in getting Georgia closer to the European Union and NATO. That was their promise. That's how they won the election. What will happen if they abandon that promise, betray that promise, and focus and treat the Georgian people as the enemy is something I can't say. That's up to the Georgian people.
On one hand, we have a political party which once was a steadfast supporter of the liberal ideology, but now portrays itself as a defender of conservative views. On the other hand, we have a party that previously ruled the country with an authoritarian approach, but now considers itself the most pro-Western and democratic. What do you think is the cause of such anomalies?
I think politics in Georgia often tends to be very personal and very tactical. I've known President Zhurabashvili for many, many years. She's not been a party person. And as president, it seems to me that she's trying to be the president of all the Georgians. I think that the approach of the Georgian Charter, a way to unite people around a platform or a set of objectives that the Georgian people seem to support, which is the road to the EU. I think that is at least a constructive way forward. I'm an American. It's none of my business how the Georgian people decide. But as an outsider, it looks to me as if she's at least trying to come up with a way that can unite people rather than divide them. And I appreciate that. That's what's needed. This is a difficult neighborhood. But Georgia, look, I'm not an expert on Georgian history, but even I know that Georgia has a very long tradition, back to the 19th century, of a democratic, pro-European orientation. That this is not a place where the values of Europe are alien or not part of the culture or unknown or mysterious. The Georgian Republic after 1918 was advanced And Georgians remember this. These are not alien concepts, and even I know this. So I have a certain respect for the Georgian people and Georgian society, and it seems to me that a successful government will be one that takes this Georgian desire for association with and membership in European and transatlantic institutions and can translate it into reality under what are truly difficult circumstances.
As you've mentioned, Georgian people are no stranger to European culture. So I wonder how common it is for European political parties to change their ideologies so easily.
Since 1989, the countries that liberated themselves from Soviet and communist rule have had, let us say, a wide variety of political experience. Some took a straight and consistent democratic path. Others took a, shall we say politely, a more winding path. Others have sunk into authoritarianism. In all cases, the EU responded to the actual events on the ground. It made it clear that authoritarian countries had to change before they joined the European Union, that there were certain conditions that were not negotiable. And I think the European Union has gained some experience with this kind of thing. There is, as I said, there is no way that an authoritarian Georgian government is going to be able to talk its way into the European Union. It's not going to happen.
Ambassador Fried, it was my pleasure to interview you. Thank you.
My pleasure.